Hello friends, I'm Dr. Chirag Trivedi. I'm the president of Indian Society for Clinical Research based in Mumbai. So clinical trials have always been the cornerstone of any drug that we develop. Any medicine that you and me or our families consume today have gone through the rigors of clinical trials. It's a way to test the drugs that we develop for safety and its efficacy. After it passes all the different phases of clinical trials, a drug is approved by the regulatory authorities basis the data that gets generated from these clinical trials, and then it is used by the practicing doctors to treat their patients. Clinical trials are really very important for us because there's a huge disease burden that we need to tackle, and it is important for us to develop drugs for different diseases to alleviate the sufferings of the patient. Now, clinical trials has evolved over a long time. If you see, they've been done since the 20th century. Randomized clinical trials. The first randomized clinical trial was done in the 17th century by a person called as James Lind. He did the clinical trial on sailors for scurvy, which is vitamin C deficiency. So he tested certain sailors with vitamin C and the others did not get vitamin C and saw the difference. So it started right from the 17th century. And on 20th May, he started doing this experiment. That's why 20th of May each year is celebrated as the International Clinical Trials Day. Now, from there on, we've definitely moved a lot, and a lot of newer diseases, therapies that we see for these diseases have gone through the rigors of clinical trials. The way in which we conduct clinical trials, the way in which we plan clinical trials has undergone a significant evolution. Technology has now been brought in. Things are moving towards getting more from the digital platforms that we are using. People are using wearables, getting data from it. Clinical trials also are using wearables now. We are looking at conducting virtual trials. That means the patient sitting in his or her comfort of her home, they send the data there. So we get the data collected from those digital devices. So the global has moved a long way in terms of the clinical development cycle. Overall, it used to take earlier 12 to 15 years to develop one drug. Today, that drug development cycle has shortened to an average of around 10 years, 8 to 10 years or so it takes for one drug to come into the market. So there's rigorous testing that happens all over, and this is a huge amount of time and investment in terms of money that goes into making of one new drug. So if you see the global research map today, there are a lot of public registries which are available. If you look at those registries globally, suppose close to 300,000 clinical studies are now currently registered on one of these websites which are available. Of that, approximately 40% of these clinical studies are registered in the US alone. Of the total number, close to 30% are registered in the European Union. So if you see here in these developed nations, a lot of clinical studies are ongoing, and they help in generating data for the drugs or for the diseases that are also started here. So in the 20th century itself, we did start doing some trials in late 70s and 80s. We had certain companies which were doing some randomized control trials and all that. From 90s onwards, a number of trials increased here in India. So that kind of the globalization of clinical trials started happening in India. The global drug development, India was being a part of global drug development since probably late 80s and early 90s or so. The rules for clinical trials in India started way back in 1988 with the Schedule Y for the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. In 2005, the Schedule Y was amended to change it. Prior to 2005, as you all may be aware, clinical trials are done in different phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So prior to 2005 in India, there was a phase lag. What does it mean? That suppose we could not do parallel phase trials as what would be going on elsewhere in the world. If some country had done phase 2 study and then they progressed to phase 3 study, we could do only phase 2 and we could concurrently not participate in that phase 3 study which was going on somewhere else in the world. Now this was changed in 2005, wherein the parallel phase studies are allowed. That means if globally a phase 3 trial is ongoing, India would also participate concurrently in that phase 3 trial. This obviously was a positive move because you would get the drug earlier in India. Initially, because of phase lag, there was a lag in the drug availability to the patients, but with this removal of the phase lag, the access of drugs to the patients became easier. So that way, it really helped a lot for our patients to get the technology, the better technology, better drugs for treating the diseases. From 2005 to 2010, we saw a good increase in the number of trials being done in India. So in 2010, we had close to 500 clinical trials that were registered with in our own registry, wherein the pharmaceutical companies were conducting these trials in India. It could be the multinational companies or it could be the Indian companies, but that really gave a good impetus to the results. But mind well, while we were doing 500 clinical trials in 2010, the percentage of our contribution to global clinical studies was only 2%. So at its peak also, we were at only 2% of the global studies that were conducted. Majority of it, again, as I said earlier, was done by the US and by the EU and other countries. So Indian Society for Clinical Research, ISCR, was formed in June 2005. Now this is a not-for-profit organization. It is consisting of all like-minded people of clinical research. The society came together to further